Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And Arif, whenever we sit down and go, okay, what are we going to talk about on next week's show? Let's find something new and fresh. And what always seems to happen, or more often than not seems to happen, is we get pulled back into what is exactly the biggest and most significant issue in our region, and that is housing availability and housing affordability. And given our most recent City Council meeting, it would be derelict of us not to talk about this very subject and some of the things that were revealed during that meeting of City Council. Are you up for this, Arif?
I'm up for it. And what's fascinating is that the topic doesn't seem to want to go away. It doesn't get old. It doesn't get tiring. And it is a massive topic. And one would think, Mike, for a moment that if you put all the greatest minds in the room together, that we could collaborate, that we could come to some form of an understanding, that there is a sense of urgency. It's amazing. I mean, I've been around a while as a homeowner. I've been a renter in the past. Things never seem to get more affordable. But this is definitely a topic that's been on my radar, both as a former counselor and as somebody who's working in the industry. Affordability has been a topic for decades. And yet, it's the buzzword, it's the flavor of the day that doesn't seem to want to go away. Yet, for some reason, the simple approach, the logical approach, seems out of reach.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, our members of City Council are very much aware of the urgency and the significance of the housing issues that we face here in Barrie. But at the same time, they are bombarded, as they were at this most recent council meeting, with deputations from residents who are totally against any sort of change. They seem to be, anything that's happening progressively beyond their own front yard is they just can't deal with. Too many people. I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush, but the more vocal ones that come forward tend to be the ones that say, no, I don't want that townhouse complex in my neighborhood. No, I don't want, second.
Yeah, Mike, I want to jump in.
The very things we need. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to jump in because here's the thing. I don't want to give too much weight and credit to the few, to the vocal minority. And one thing that you've heard me say this before, I had this epiphany moment at one time. It might have been my only epiphany moment. It might have been the only intelligent thing I ever said. But when we looked out at the when we looked out at the audience and we saw a crowded what looked like a crowded auditorium of 100 and some odd people, all of a sudden everybody got, went quiet and hushed and like, oh my gosh, the world must be coming to an end. Something big's out. We're going to get in trouble. We're going to get yelled at, whatever it might be. And it was, wait a second, this room can only hold a maximum of 200 people. And there are 150,000 residents in the city of Barrie. Yes. We serve all of them. And so don't let this tiny proportion, less than a percentage of the population, sway you. You got to do what you know is right, even if to a few people, angry people in the crowd don't like it. That's okay. Right?
That's perspective. And so let me ask you then, Arif, as a once and former Barrie City Councillor, is it quite possible that some, maybe not all, but some, see those people who are in the gallery, the people who have an agenda or have an issue? Is it possible some councillors see them as low-hanging fruit that's just waiting for them to harvest, that if they can rally around their concerns and their issues, then they've guaranteed themselves a larger support base? Do you think that's an incentive?
I'm going to answer the question differently, Mike, and intentionally so. I have never been a fan of dismissing anybody. I've never been a fan of dismissing anybody's perspective. I think everybody has perspective, and they've got their own lens that they're looking through, and they've got their own reasons that something is either impacting them or they've chosen to be impacted, whatever it may be. The fact of the matter is, though, that many of the groups that come forward are those who are vocal. They present themselves as a group, and then there's one or two people who are actually the active member behind the group, and they're passionate about something. They're passionate about whatever it is that their group stands for and their mandate is. And that's great. We always need that. What we have to recognize as a democratic society and as an institution that has elected or appointed or elected representatives to represent the whole is that more often than not, the whole or the majority of the whole isn't even emailing you once in your entire term. They're not calling you. They're not emailing you. They're happy with the way things are. They're happy with what you're doing. And then you'll have a very small percentage of the people who will constantly remind you how you're horrible at your job. Right. And that's the reality. So there has to be room at the table for everybody to provide input, but it doesn't mean that you have to listen to everybody who provides input. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, around this topic, Mike, for 10 years plus, this mayor and the councils, if you will, have said housing affordability, we are at a point of crisis. Housing availability for those who live in and around the poverty rate. We're in a crisis position right now, and we need to do something. And what it seems to be, though, is that we say one thing, but then, and I'm not pointing at the mayor, I'm saying in general, what has just happened today, what was just ratified last night, was that we've done anything except move housing affordability to move the needle on housing affordability.
Yeah, well, let's look at some of the very things they did talk about in this meeting, and at least half of the time was spent talking about accessory dwelling units and what rules and regulations need to be enforced or even increased, which was the result at this meeting. It was originally brought forward with a requirement of a 3-meter setback for an auxiliary residential dwelling in a backyard of an existing home. That was increased to 7 meters. One councillor tried to find a middle ground and have that go to 5 meters, but no, the final vote was for a 7-meter setback, which is 22 and a half feet of setback. So that in itself almost eliminates more than half, probably 3/4 or more of the residential properties that could possibly hold these. Now, if they applied that same 22-meter setback to having a pool in your backyard, there's a good chance there would be little or no pools in Barrie, Ontario, unless you had a half-acre property. So rather than cancel or ban these suites, they're creating zoning bylaws and regulations that will effectively see them all but banned anyways. So
and you have to wonder if that was the intention anyway. It's kind of like quoting, you don't want to do the job, but you don't want to be rude, so you respond with a quote that prices yourself right out of the market. We got to go to break, Mike.
Transparent, yeah.
It is. We got to go to break. Let's come back, and when we come back, let's actually talk about it. Let's talk about what the issue is. Let's talk about what the solution could have been. Let's talk about some timelines and how we could make an impact that would be positive. If that's truly what we stand for. And I'm not giving you my personal opinion. I'm saying if that's what we stand for. Well, we got to go to break. And when we come back, let's pick it up. It's a good topic. Stay with us for more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif and our opinions and those that are our opinion only on Rogers TV Barrie.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we are talking about, once more, housing affordability and housing availability, and specifically about some of the things that happened in a recent city council meeting, some of the changes that were proposed and some of them that have been implemented. Here is the challenge. Of course, we have a lack of available housing here in Barrie. And that has made affordability even more of a challenge here for Barrie residents. And here's one of the realities, and there are far more bedrooms in this town. There are far more underdeveloped or undeveloped basements existing within this town than there are people who actually are in need of affordable housing. And the challenge should be for City Council to find ways to match those two things together. I think we can take a big dent out of the issue that we have here if we find a way to play Yet what I see at City Council again and again is instead of changing some of the archaic laws and zoning regulations within our city with relation to second suites and rental housing, we seem to be just adding new layers every time the issue comes up. And that just takes us further and further away from the solution. And the problem is, people, if they can't afford to have a home here in Barrie or rent here in Barrie, they're going to leave. Businesses are going to leave eventually when the people they need to hire are unable to afford to live in the community. And that is going to see our property values topple in time. So be careful what you wish for when you say, no, we don't want any of these things that are going to help to aid with housing availability or bring our prices in check.
Yeah, Mike. So let me offer this thought. I mean, there are so many things going through my mind right now, and so many great analogies and comparables to bring up. I remember not so long ago we were at locally and provincially addressing a concern around garbage and waste, and what are we going to do because the U.S. is going to slam the door shut on allowing Ontario to literally ship truckloads and truckloads a day over the border to Michigan, for example, where they have much less stringent environmental restrictions. So like pass our problem on to them, they'll deal with it, and it's affordable. And so they were going to shut the door on it, and all of a sudden, what are we going to do? Well, the answer was incineration, and that was brought to us by a number of nations, certainly in Germany and Europe in general, have been using clean, zero residual incineration. Excuse me, successfully. And we were like, well, that's kind of expensive. We're not going to do it. So okay, fine. But what ended up happening is, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of the small town in Northern Ontario, not Kathleen Wynn's Northern Ontario being a Barrie, but actual Northern Ontario, that said, hey, no problem. We'll take your trash and we're going to dig a deep hole in the bedrock, and we're going to put the right amount of cement lining and put in the right amount of security in place. And we're going to be able to employ half of our residents who are currently unemployed with amazing paying jobs, and we're going to do it safely. Send us your garbage. So here's the reality. The reality is, as you said, there are many bedrooms that are unused or underutilized. There's a reason why the law may or may not say one thing around shared accommodations versus separated suites. And then there's what the market says and what the market does. And the market says, you want to live in my bedroom? Give me $500 a month, no problem. You can share my kitchen, my toilet, my laundry. It's great. The market tells us what it wants. And that's where the appetite has been. We're talking about housing affordability, and we're talking about the fact, Mike, as you said, that we've put so many restrictions in place that go completely against what we've said we want. I remember mayor and council a term ago or so was talking about the fact that there are so many empty driveways, and we're going to do the Uber or the Airbnb of parking. And we're going to look at listing your parking spot on your driveway available to rent near rapid transit, for example, near the GO station. And it was the greatest thing on the planet. It was a great idea. I don't know what the uptake is, but when it came to second suites, everybody said, I don't want to have all these strangers. I don't want to have cars parked on the front lawn. There's not enough capacity. It's going to be disastrous. And by the way, I was one of those people who had concerns. And I remember my former seatmate, John Brassard, had a similar concern around capacity. And you know what we were told by staff? Relax. There's not going to be a huge uptake anyway. And the truth of the matter is,
number who would take advantage or actually use.
We were around 10% uptake. So all of this outburst and outcry about we're destroying all the vegetation and we're ruining everybody, there's still less than 10% of people doing it. It's not going to be rampant. But what we were talking about on the flip side, Mike, is the term that's not a lovely term, ghettoization. Why don't you touch on that and the impact of doing it the other way?
Yeah, it's a nasty term we don't like to use, but essentially many of the actions that take place, or the lack of actions, focus a lot of our more affordable housing into the downtown core. Now, as prices go up, we're starting to see a gentrification taking place where a lot of those bigger, older homes in downtown Toronto that may be, or downtown Barrie, sorry, that may be rooming houses today, much as they were in Toronto, they evolve into, boutique condominiums and so forth, and it pushes people out. And we need to be prepared for that push because we're not going to stop it. But again, there is the availability of accommodation throughout the city in second suites. And I think we need to take this more seriously, that second suites are a big part of the solution. Institutional type of multi-unit developments take a long time to get from idea, concept, to actual shovels in the ground, to people actually living in them. It can take 10 years or longer. And again, with the more and more layers of bureaucracy, we're seeing fewer and fewer of them being built, but there are some that are coming forward, but there would be far more if the process was streamlined, I believe. It's interesting that it's a much easier process for me as a bungalow owner to go to city council and get approval to build my house into a big 2-story, monster home than it would be for me to go to city council and say, I want to get approval for a townhouse on the three.
Yeah, listen, Mike,
that I brought,
Mike, a couple of years ago, we thought that we were at a crisis point. And if you look at what's happened in the last couple of years, you've had 1 year of housing prices go up 40%, another year they went up 32%. And if we think we had a crisis 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I don't know what the heck you call this one. But what we definitely can see is that instead of, where a couple of years ago we said, let's put forward some incentives and let's make second suites incentivized for people to embrace and take it on. And today we're saying, yeah, forget what we did a couple of years ago. We don't want that incentive. We don't want anybody actually solving the affordability crisis. Because here's the thing, when you take the income that is possible from a separated suite, a registered separate suite, a lender will allow a homeowner or a new first-time buyer to use that as income to offset their monthly obligations, their what's known as debt servicing ratio. And that makes home ownership that much more affordable, possibly by 15% or 20% more affordable. We got to go to break, Mike. I know you want to say something. Hold that thought. When we come back, let's talk about this, a little bit more. I think we're going to run out of show before we run out of solutions.
And there's one more thing that was dealt with council that we should do, and it's a positive thing. We got to throw at least one positive thing in there.
Good. Let's go to break. We'll be right back with more opinions from Mike and Arif on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And on this show, you're getting our opinions, and we're talking about that topic that just does not seem to want to go away, but it's a critical topic. And I think it's important. We're talking about housing affordability, and we're talking about making more supply available. And while we're saying that as a nation or as a province or as a municipality and as people on social media who are expressing their opinions, we see something entirely opposite actually happening. We're saying there's a need, there's a challenge. What is the next generation going to do? What is the senior going to do? I can't afford it myself. And we're also seeing that renting is more expensive than home ownership itself by far. Yes. Don't take my opinion. Take the actual economists and the journalists who are reporting on this. That's what they're saying. And we have a solution. And the solution in front of us is to embrace the concept of secondary suites. And that is something that individuals can do in a timely fashion, is just accept the incentives that municipalities have put forward and build accommodation. And there are so many benefits to that. And I'm not telling you that I want to do it. And I know that many of my neighbors wouldn't want to do it. That's not the point. There isn't such a huge uptake on it, and it could make a massive difference, Mike. But what I'm seeing, and what we're both talking about, is that there's actually a lack of will to do it. There's no political willpower to do it locally. They actually have intentionally gone out of the way to make it so that it will be unattainable by homeowners. Because as you pointed out, Mike, so many homes don't have a large enough lot to be able to accommodate and live up to that setback that they've just imposed.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not even a matter of, that we would suddenly be overrun with second suites. You pointed out it's 10% or fewer would actually get involved with this. But we are seeing an increasing number of people who not only would benefit by the additional income from having a second suite in their home. It may be the difference of qualifying or not qualifying for some, but the positive thing that I alluded to just before the break was that came out of council was a change that is going to allow up to 50% of residential, or sorry, up to 50% residential on institutional property. So you have an institutional building with 100,000 square feet, 50,000 square feet can then be earmarked for residential. It looks good on the surface, as many things do, but my fear is once you try to implement this, there are a number of existing bylaws and restrictions and setbacks with regards to residential in conjunction with industrial. Are they not going to, render much of the property that could be a candidate for such a change as non-qualifying?
Well, Mike, that's just it. I mean, I think that this is definitely a yellow flag for me. I'm not going to suggest that it's a red flag because I need to see more on it. But there are some absolute facts, and the absolute fact is that many lenders, if not the majority of lenders, and I'm talking about the lender that you would want to get into a relationship with as a homeowner, have restrictions in place that say we will not provide financing for mixed use properties, otherwise known as dual zone properties, or any property that claims to be residential but has a commercial or industrial or agricultural component associated with it. And you can say whatever you want. You can say, but I'm using it to live in. And the bank will say, but we don't know what you're going to do tomorrow. And so that's not only the banks, but it's also the national mortgage default insurers, the CMHCs, the former Genworths. I don't even know what they're called today. Sorry, I should. And the other insurers that are out there today will not allow somebody who's putting less than 20% down. And that is a big deal for people who are putting down 5%, 10%, whatever, and they need that mortgage default insurance. They will not get approval because of that, what we'll call as cross-contamination, for lack of a better word.
So I'm left to wonder, those who brought this forward, at City Hall, they've either A, not done their homework before they brought this forward, or B, they know that this is the reality, but it's a distraction and it offers a false sense of hope. And I hope it's neither of those things, but I think my response to it all is looking at that and listening to what you said. Again, we do have existing opportunities here with second suites, and we need to get past the NIMBYism. We need to, instead of just hiring more bylaw officers to enforce and police and regulate and stifle and restrict, we need to create even more incentives. We need to lobby harder with our province and federal government for funding. And we need to find ways to utilize the square footage of existing residential property in this city far more efficiently than we are. And
yeah, well, Mike, I think, yeah, I want to be very careful because, as I said, I don't know enough. It's only based on what we've talked about so far, and I haven't read the document. I don't know enough. Somebody could easily argue, well, if you look at any condo, they've got ground floor commercial or professional office space or something like that, and then there's residential on top. Yes, that's purpose built. That's a condo. That's something that the system is already used to. It's expected, and it is intentional residential dwelling. And when you condominiumize it itself, it's sort of in a class of its own, right? It's in its own zoning category. We're talking about the idea of converting some industrial purposes. Now, if we take an industrial plot of land, demolish it and rezone it as purely residential, that's different. If we're talking about cohabitation, and if we're talking about proximity to industrial uses, well, then lenders and insurers are going to take into consideration what they'll call adverse circumstances or adverse influences that are in the neighboring region. Mike, we are out of time. I want to be positive on this. I want to say that something good's going to come out of it. I do think we know what the obvious is, and that is we need to allow supply to happen, but it certainly feels like we've gone one step forward and two steps back this week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif.